Good evening, I'm Julia Knights, Deputy Director of the Science Museum in London, and welcome to the latest edition in our Climate Talks debates. The most crucial climate talks of all, the United Nations COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow, gets underway in a little less than 50 days from now, and will define the future course of the Earth's climate, natural habitats, biodiversity and oceans, as well as the lives of billions across the planet. Tonight's discussion focuses on agriculture and how to feed the world sustainably. According to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report on climate change and land, agriculture, forestry and other land use represents around 23% of total net anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions globally. In other words, close to 1/4 of all global emissions of greenhouse gases. Our fantastic panel of experts tonight will examine the impacts that agriculture has on our climate, including food security, and will look at some of the solutions to making food production more sustainable, from enhancing soil carbon to no-till agriculture and reducing our food waste. I'm now delighted to introduce your chair for this evening, Dr. Anjana Ahuja, who is a contributing science writer for the Financial Times, has a PhD in space physics from Imperial, and is co-author with Sir Jeremy Farrar of the brilliant new book, Spike, the People versus the Virus. Anjana, over to you, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Julia, for that introduction, and thank you everyone at home who's watching and joining us for the latest in the Science Museum Group's Global Climate Talk series. And I also want to thank you for bearing with us during the technical issues. Thank you very much for your patience. So tonight's event comes at an important time for the Science Museum Group, who've just completed a research project on exploring what we know about the global food crisis. And that project is funded by the Lloyd's Register Foundation and partners with museums in Brazil and India. And the report in that is coming out soon. So we're looking forward to that. But on to tonight's proceedings. I'm really looking forward to an inspiring discussion with a fabulous range of panelists. And it's on a topic that is an absolutely crucial one to address if we're to get serious about tackling climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions in time to avoid catastrophic global heating. So how can we feed the world without accelerating that catastrophic climate change? We've got a current global population of around 7.5 billion, and that is expected to soar to nearly 10 billion by 2050. So many of you will have seen the IPCC report on climate change, very sobering reading, and global temperatures are on course to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2050, and that's even 2040, and that's even in the best case scenario. So by reducing our emissions in half by the end of this decade, we may start to halt further increase, but our food systems are already feeling the damaging impacts of those temperatures. So as you'll hear this evening, climate change is already having an impact on farming globally. So before we get started, let's introduce tonight's panel. And in no particular order, we have first Petronella Halwiindi, please wave and say hello to us, who joins us from Uganda, where she is country head of the charity Farm Africa, which also works in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Kenya and Tanzania, growing agriculture, protecting the environment and developing businesses in rural areas. So welcome, Petronella. Next, I would like to warmly welcome Dr. Modi Mwatsama, who this week started a new role as the Head of Interventions for Climate and Health at the Wellcome Trust. She previously led on research, partnership and policy on healthy diets and sustainable food systems with the Wellcome Trust. And We just want to welcome you, Modi, and it sounds really interesting what you're moving on from your old programme, Our Planet, Our Health, onto what you're doing now. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about that. Next, we have Kristin Ohlson, who joins us from Portland in Oregon. So we're a very global panel this evening. Kristin is an award-winning journalist and best-selling author of The Soil Will Save Us: How Scientists, Farmers and Foodies are Healing the Soil to Save the Planet. So good afternoon to you, Kristin. And we are also joined by someone that everyone will be familiar with, Heston Blumenthal. Heston is a Michelin-starred chef, 6 stars, founder of the world-famous Fat Duck restaurant, a champion of molecular gastronomy, pioneer of multisensory eating, and he's also an honorary fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry. So thank you very much for joining us, Heston. We're really pleased to have you. And last, by no means least, is Matt Reynolds. Welcome, Matt. He's science editor for Wired UK, and Matt has also just written his first book, published on the 16th of September, called How to Feed the Planet Without Destroying It. So, Matt, looking forward to hearing what you've got to say later on. So let's get started, and I'm going to begin by speaking with our panelists for a few minutes each before we open up to a broader panel discussion. So I'd like to start with you, Modi Mwatsama. First, could you tell us a bit about your background and the work that you do with the Wellcome Trust?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I have a background in nutrition and public health. Prior to joining Wellcome, I was director of policy and global health for an organisation called the UK Health Forum. And there I worked on policies to prevent non-communicable diseases. Examples of things I worked on were the updating of the government's Eat Well Guide to healthy eating, which for the first time included sustainability considerations in 2016, as well as things like the Childhood Obesity Action Plan Chapters 1 and 2, which led to policies such as the soft drinks industry levy and junk food restrictions, marketing restrictions on TV in the UK. At Wellcome, I've been involved in identifying and funding the solutions, science-based solutions, which can help to address both climate change and also simultaneously improve people's health. So examples of the sorts of research we funded include the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Diet Report, which was published in 2019. We've also funded research into solutions such as alternative proteins like livestock, mini livestock or insects, and things like duckweed, and looking at them as potential sources of alternative proteins to meat and dairy. So that's just a snapshot of what I've done, what I'm currently doing in Wellcome.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Modi. So let's start with the basics. Exactly how does agriculture and more broadly food systems, so let's say the whole network of food activity, so that's transport, refrigeration, packaging and production, how does all that impact climate change?
Sure. So as you said in your introduction, food systems currently account for around a quarter or 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And these emissions include things like carbon dioxide and methane. The bulk of food system emissions currently come from agriculture. Around 46% of them come from the agriculture food system. The contributors to this include things like deforestation, which means cutting down trees to clear land and forests to clear land to grow things like food and feed for livestock. Trees are an important part of the ecosystem. They help to keep the world cool by recycling rain and rainwater. So when forests are cleared, that contributes to global warming. Trees are also an important carbon sink. So they help to absorb carbon from the atmosphere and therefore reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, which are also contributing to global warming. So clearing land to grow food is a big contributor. Another major contributor from agriculture is the use of artificial fertilizers. Their use has increased by around 30% in the last 40 or so years, particularly driven by emerging economies like Brazil, where actually levels of artificial fertilizers have increased by around 120%. Artificial fertilizers contribute nitrous oxide to the atmosphere. That has a very high global warming potential, as it's around 800 times more potent than carbon dioxide and is the third biggest greenhouse gas emission that is contributing to global warming. Another major source from agriculture is the production of rice, and that's linked to methane. Around 2.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions in total come from rice production. But by far the biggest contribution of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture comes from the livestock sector as a sector. So growing things like animals for meat and dairy. Animal agriculture alone accounts for around 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's the biggest single contributor from the livestock system. And that's particularly down to ruminant animals like beef and cat and lamb, sheep, which produce methane. And that's another potent but short-lived greenhouse gas that's around 80 to 90 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And so looking at Sure.
No, that's all right. So in terms of the emissions caused by particular agricultural practices, I mean, you mentioned rice, for example, globally, who are the worst culprits?
So the worst culprits globally are the biggest, the countries that produce the most amount of livestock. So for instance, the UK, EU, Brazil, New Zealand, Australia. But then you've also got countries which are clearing rainforests like Indonesia to produce commodities like palm oil, also major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And then, of course, you've got the big commodity companies that produce these products. So particularly, for instance, the 13 biggest livestock companies combined, their greenhouse gas emissions are of a similar size to countries like Germany and France, for example.
Wow.
So those are kind of the biggest culprits globally.
Okay, and before I let you go, Modi, can you tell me, can a transition to more sustainable farming also lead to healthier food and healthier people?
It absolutely can. So globally, I'll just remind everyone that globally around 1 billion people are undernourished, another 2 billion are overweight or obese, they eat too many calories, and a further 2 billion have got hidden micronutrient deficiencies like iron and zinc. The causes of this are unsustainable diets, which are also poor. In the global north, in developed countries, we eat too many calories from ultra-processed foods, too much meat, not enough plant-based foods like fruits and vegetables. In the global south, people are eating monotonous diets with too much starchy staples like maize and rice, and not enough plant-based foods like fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, and pulses. And so in all regions of the world, we really need to significantly increase our dietary diversity, increase our production and consumption of those healthier plant-based foods, which are also the very foods that we need to increase production of to make the food system more sustainable and healthy. So the solutions for improving diets are also the same solutions that we need to transition towards to make the food system more sustainable.
Excellent. Thank you, Modi. And don't go anywhere. I want to move on to our second panelist, Heston Blumenthal. He's a real pioneer of the gastronomic world. His question everything approach to cooking has led to such wonders as multisensory dining, the use of liquid nitrogen in restaurant kitchens, and such things as bacon and egg ice cream. I've never had it, but I'll look forward to one day being able to afford it, Heston. Meat, fruit, and even the now ubiquitous triple cooked chips. So Heston knows a thing or two about food innovation. So Heston, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can't hear Heston.
Okay.
Are you able to?
I don't know.
Are you muted, Heston?
No, I'm not.
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay.
Lovely, brilliant.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, excellent. Now, Heston, you've worked in commercial kitchens for nearly 40 years. How have attitudes to sustainable eating changed since you first started your career?
For me, that's irrelevant. I've spent 25 years studying and looking at precision-driven cooking. So milligrams and grams and temperatures and multisensory, so the outside in. Now, after 25 years, I believe that we should be putting the being back into doing. About sustainability, yes, we should be worried about the plastic issue and the coral dying, and we should be worried about the CO2 emissions and methane from cows. What about imagination? My next book is about quantum gastronomy. And the reason why people don't understand quantum is because there was a guy called Hercules that said, no man puts his foot or leg in the same river twice, because the river is never the same and the man is never the same. So the mathematics cannot catch up with quantum. However, you can explain it to human beings. There is always a minimum of two different perspectives on anything that we do, which comes into placebo, nocebo.
But Heston, I want to get you onto agriculture.
I am.
And
no,
sustainable eating.
Sustainable. The thing we need to sustain for me is the beauty of human imagination. Imagination and memory are the same thing. So how can you imagine doing anything without celebrating the beauty of human imagination, which is unique? I'm not saying it's better or worse than a tree's imagination or a mountain's. So yes, keep on sorting the plastics out. However, when we use our imagination and we tell a story around a raisin, and we tell a story around a grain of rice, we tell a story around a piece of wheat, or a sip of water, we eat to feel fulfilled as opposed to eating to feel full. It's such a simple yet complex thing. It's all we need to do. David Attenborough spoke about harnessing the energy of the earth. What about the beauty of human imagination? Everyone is creative. Picasso said, everyone is born an artist. The difficulty.
All right, Heston, you're an artist. You're an artist. You're an artist.
We all are.
Yeah.
No,
let's talk about you, but you are a true artist. You're a true gastronomic artist. So can you think, do you ever think it is possible to protect the planet and produce beautiful food?
We're not killing the trees' planet. We're killing our planets. We will die before the trees.
So what can we do in food? We've just heard about agriculture. So do you think it's a matter of just being more imaginative in the way that we produce food, the way that we run our agriculture, the way that we feed people?
Definition of intelligence. My hero is Sir Ken Robinson. My new book, which is Quantum Gastronomy, is dedicated to Sir Ken Robinson. So we should continue to sort out the plastic issue and the coral issue. Yes, 100%, 100%, 100%. But the education system is mining our minds, and degrees aren't worth anything anymore. I've refused 3 professorships. I've got 5 doctorates. You use figures. I've got best restaurant in the world and best this and best that and best that. And then I realized I was trying to prove to people that I wasn't an idiot.
Well, you're not an idiot because you've done so much innovation.
Wait. At some point, some person who was also happened to be from Greece sat and looked at the stars and thought, maybe the sun isn't rising. Maybe we are spinning. That's a human being, Charles Darwin. That's a human being. The incredible ability of human beings. We should be celebrating this. If we celebrate that and sustain that, then everything else will follow. Figures, mathematics cannot. Go on.
Well, let me ask you, Heston. What are the innovations you're going to bring it to your? what is going to come from your kitchen? Are you going to be using lab-grown
Nothing. I've done it.
meats? Are you going to be? What about insects? New forms of
I've,
protein?
15 years ago, insects. Yeah, fine.
So what's today? So what are we going to be eating in your
I don't care.
kitchens?
I care about our relationship with the planet. I care about human beings. I cry when I see Ken Robinson's TED Talk. I cry. Why do I cry? I haven't cried since I was 40. Why do I cry? Human imagination. I have ADHD. And I talk to people and they don't understand me. And they think I'm mad. They think I'm mad.
We don't think you're mad, but we want to know what you think the big innovations will be in food and gastronomy in the years to come.
I just told you, our relationship with the planet, self-awareness, taking what is an emotion? It is a word. It's a word. What is fear? No one has the same fear anytime they have fear. It's a categorization of an emotion that comes from a word, that comes from language, that comes from connectivity, that comes from human beings creating fire, and the frontal lobe grew at the same time as roughly with the 1.82 million years ago to protect the changing gut. We started from we started from a single cell bacteria at the bottom of the ocean with one hole.
Yeah.
So I could go through the whole thing of evolution. It's a big thing.
I know we don't have time for that. Sorry, Heston. We're going to have to move on to our next panelist.
So what I'm saying is we have to sustain the beautiful ability of human beings to imagine a three-legged giraffe teaching quantum physics to penguins dancing to Neil Diamond in a classroom. Everyone can imagine that. That is unique. And
that's quite an image that I think we're going to have to move on, Heston.
I'll finish with this.
But we are going to.
So, hang on, wait, please. So Ken Robinson died last year. Yeah. And he asked Goldie Hawn and Hugh Jackman. Okay, I'll give you 14 seconds. Imagine if Hugh Jackman said, "Imagine if we lived in a world with no family." I said, "Imagine if we lived in a world with no imagination." That, for me, is sustainability.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Heston, for your thoughts on sustainability and the innovation of the future and that holistic sort of philosophy that you've got. So we are now going to move on to Petronella Halwiindi. Welcome, Petronella. You're the Uganda Country Director for Farm Africa. It's a fantastic charity, but for those who aren't familiar with what you do, could you please tell us about the work that Farm Africa does?
Thank you, Angie. Farm Africa is an international NGO that reduces poverty in rural Eastern Africa by helping farmers grow more, and sell for more. We help farmers to not only boost yields, but also gain access to markets and add value to their produce. We place a very high priority on environmental sustainability and develop approaches that help farmers improve their yields and incomes without degrading their natural resources. Our programs vary hugely, ranging from helping crop farmers to boost crop harvests, to livestock keepers improving their animal health, and forest coffee growers to reach export markets. Core to all of our programs is a focus on the financial and environmental sustainability of the farmers' businesses.
Okay, so Petronella, in terms of the effect of climate change on food production, what impacts are being felt now in East Africa?
We've experienced unpredictable weather patterns and climate extremes ranging from floods to droughts, having an impact on landscapes. We have mudslides in different places, and all of these are threatening farmers and pastoralists who rely on rain-fed agriculture for a living. Millions of farming families in rural Africa face a fall into extreme poverty when their harvests fail because they lack a financial buffer. Climate shocks often lead to vulnerable households selling off their valuable assets, including land and livestock. And those are assets that are very essential to their livelihoods and help them otherwise to recover from such shocks. Furthermore, climate-related shocks push farming communities towards unsustainable livelihood options, such as charcoal burning or cutting even more trees in the forests. Now, Farm Africa is helping rural communities to gain access to skills, knowledge, and inputs, and finance and markets they need to build resilience to climate change. From promoting climate-smart agricultural techniques, including terracing in hilly landscapes, use of organic fertilizers, use of improved varieties of seeds that are high-yielding, resistant to pests, and suited to extreme environmental conditions. We are also supporting smallholder farmers to get access to finance, which is key in ensuring that the farmers have access to the money they need to invest in these technologies that help to increase their productivity and help them resilience against the face of a changing climate. Simple technologies, simple interventions, yes, like village savings and loans.
Okay, so we've talked about making farming and crops more resilient to climate change, but what needs to happen to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions now?
A key driver of greenhouse gas emissions, as Doc earlier alluded to, is deforestation. This is a key driver to greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture because we're always constantly trying to expand the agricultural frontier. And what we need to do is, instead of expand our frontier, we need to sustainably intensify agriculture through the use of high quality inputs such as improved seeds and fertilizers, mechanization, good use of agricultural practices, rather than continually expanding the land for agriculture. Eastern Africa only achieves around 50% of optimal productivity, which gives us a lot of potential to increase productivity versus increasing the agricultural land that we're cutting down. We need to be able to employ. It is about efficiency. It is about efficiency. Africa has enough land right now that is already cleared for agriculture. We do not need to cut down more trees to create more land for farming. Instead, what we need to do is intensify and grow more on the land that we already have. We need to employ climate-smart agricultural techniques. We need to make sure that market systems are streamlined so that we're bringing inputs and markets closer to the farm. Maybe not literally, but by improving market linkages, having better infrastructure for transport, storage and processing, using renewable energy, ensuring that the big contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, which is livestock, having been critiqued for a long time, are better managed on the land that we have, ensuring that rangeland is managed well to ensure that all the animals are fed within what we already have. Increasing access to finance. I already mentioned access to finance, but this is really key because it is a driver towards the adoption of the sustainable agricultural practices that we're talking about.
So that's really interesting you mentioned finance. I mean, in terms of COP26 and the UN Food Systems Summit, which is coming up too, what do you think are the key issues, very briefly, that they have to address?
Government investments in agricultural productivity has to increase. As part of the Maputo Declaration in 2003, African governments committed to spend 10% of their national budgets on agriculture. But up to now, what we see is that most governments are only investing about 6% of the committed funds. Now, if government could promote agricultural intensifications, then farmers would not need to expand their land. Okay? If governments could invest in more infrastructure that helps to bring inputs and markets closer to the farmers, such as I mentioned storage, I mentioned transportation, we would be able to reduce food waste. You know, FAO estimates that if food waste were a country, it would be the third highest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, in developing countries, food waste mainly happens at the start of the supply chain. And food is wasted before it gets to the market, with 30% of losses occurring at post-harvest and processing levels. Now, if we can invest more in the infrastructure that needs to bring food from the farm to the fork, we will be able to significantly contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions within our agricultural systems.
Brilliant. Thank you, Petronella. That's given us food for thought. And I want to move on now to Kristin Ohlson, who's been sitting patiently. Thank you very much, Kristin, author of The Soil Will Save Us. So your area of interest is in, no prizes for guessing, soil. So tell us why soil has such an important role to play in battling climate change.
Well, most people think of soil as just something that we walk on or something that we put things on, like houses or cities, or something that we stick plants in just to hold them up. But soil is actually an incredibly important ecosystem, a vibrant ecosystem. Like in a handful of soil, there's billions of microorganisms. And one of the things that that ecosystem does when it's healthy is store carbon. You know, plants, and the way that the carbon gets there is that plants, through photosynthesis, take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they convert that carbon dioxide into a carbon fuel, and that's what they use to grow. That's what they use to make their roots and shoots and fruits. But a large part of that carbon fuel that the plants make, 40%, sometimes much more, is shared with the plant's partners in the soil, those microbial partners that are in the soil. So plants are sharing that carbon fuel with their microbial partners in the soil, and some of that carbon stays in the soil. Some of that carbon stays in the soil for a very long time, and that carbon enriches the soil. So that's been going on for millions and millions of years before humans started to disrupt it.
So how have agricultural practices damaged the soil?
Well, one of the things, you know, when we imagine agriculture, we imagine these neat rows with these, you know, one crop going down the middle, and there being a line of bare soil between those crops. So everything that we see in that picture is kind of off in terms of how nature itself produces food. How does nature produce food? If we go out in a meadow, if we go out in the woods and we see fruits growing, they're not growing in isolation from other plants. They're growing in a big hurly-burly jumble of vegetation. So what we do when we commit agriculture is that we plow. That's one of the first things we do. We plow and we completely disrupt and break that incredible ecosystem under our feet. And then we often grow plants in what's called a monoculture. We grow one plant over thousands and thousands of hectares, one plant, which is so completely different from how nature grows things. You know, nature will, you know, in a square foot or a square yard, there will be sometimes hundreds of different kinds of plants. So we grow one kind of plant, and we use sprays to kill the rest of the kind of plants that could grow there. And we use chemical fertilizers to make those plants grow faster. All these things that we're doing are disrupting natural partnerships between living organisms and preventing that farm ecosystem from performing its role of bringing carbon into the soil and keeping it there. So because of all that, well, I just want to say, before I forget this figure, because of all that, we have lost 135 gigatons of carbon from the Earth's soils. Not all from this kind of agriculture, but in large part from this kind of agriculture.
So what can we do to repair it?
Well, farmers around the world are doing that. And, you know, and some farmers have been doing that for centuries, you know, have been farming in a very ecological way. So one of the things that farmers are doing around the world is cutting back on tillage, sometimes eliminating it completely so that they're not disrupting that soil ecosystem. Another thing that farmers are doing is trying to avoid the monoculture. So instead of just having that one row of crops with a bare strip of soil between them, they're growing companion plants or cover plants between those rows so that that soil is protected there and more of that carbon fuel is going down into the soil. And farmers around the world are experimenting with giving up all those different agrochemicals that make the land sicker and not, that make the land sicker. So by doing all this, they're trying to turn agricultural lands, which are for the most part a carbon source, they're trying to turn those agricultural lands into a carbon sink. And some of them are doing splendidly at that.
And what's the role of governments here in perhaps helping, persuading, ensuring that industrial farmers play their role in restoring the soil?
Well, there are a couple of things that government can do. I mean, a couple of big things. The first thing is to stop subsidizing hazardous farming practices. You know, there are farmers here in the United States who can farm in, who are encouraged by government subsidies, by bank loans, and all of that to farm in a really hazardous way for the environment. And of course, then the second thing that they can do is instead restructure the subsidy system so that farmers who are farming in an ecologically advantageous way are supported. I mean, I think that farmers should be receiving a premium when they're building up the carbon in their soil, when they're farming ecologically. They're providing a public good by removing carbon from the atmosphere and getting it down into the soil. Those people should be rewarded.
Excellent. Thank you, Kristin. And we're going to go to our final panelist, science editor for Wired UK and author of How to Feed the Planet Without Destroying It, Matt Reynolds. Hi, Matt. How are you?
I'm good, Ange. Thanks for having me.
Great. No, it's a pleasure. So, Matt, one of the big threats of food insecurity is the risk of war and conflict over diminishing resources. So how worried should we be about that global rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial, maybe even higher, leading to food shortages, famine, conflict, mass migration? Is it really that bad?
Yeah, I think we should be pretty worried, and we don't have to look that far into the future to be worried about it. If you look at a country like Bangladesh, we're already seeing that seawater incursion is basically destroying rice paddies because rice don't like it when the water gets too salty, it dies, and farmers there are en masse turning their rice fields into shrimp farms because they just don't have access to enough fresh water. We're also seeing, in drier parts of the world, desertification, the spread of arid land where there's not enough irrigation to supply crops with water. And these are places that are already extremely water stressed. And we know how, scarce a resource fresh water is. And although it's a little bit difficult with the science to project what the knock-on effects will be in terms of migration, there are lots of projections out there, but it's hard to say, well, it'll lead to this war or it'll displace this many people. What we do know is that this means a whole bunch more uncertainty in terms of yield. Are growing seasons going to get longer or are they going to get shorter? New invasive species, and we've already got like a bit of a sense of what that uncertainty looks like. If you saw supermarket shelves, even in the UK, they were empty of meat, or farmers saying, well, we're going to have to plough all these extra crops under during the COVID-19 pandemic because these supply chains were disrupted. That's really just a little bit of a glimpse, I guess, of the kind of uncertainty that would become much more common and the kind of lack of robustness in food chains. It becomes much more common when we're talking about 1.5 degrees of warming or 2.7 degrees of warming, likely to be much more closer to 3. And I think what we have to remember is the people who are already the most vulnerable in our food systems, subsistence farmers in Africa or parts of Asia, they're the people who are most at risk for these changes. Growing seasons are going to become much shorter in parts of Africa, and I think we need to, remember who exactly is going to be impacted by these changes. And there's lots of reasons to be worried, really.
So, give us some optimism, Matt. Tell us about the technical innovations that might be coming on stream that perhaps could keep us feeding the world while keeping a lid on emissions. I mean, what about artificial intelligence? Any other innovations? Give us something.
So I'm meant to be a technology journalist, right? But I think I'm really bad at this, because really some of the biggest problems in our food system have really, really simple solutions. So one of the biggest problems is food waste. About a third of food that is raised or produced is never eaten. And it's a commonly quoted statistic that if food waste was a country, its emissions would be the third highest in the world, behind China and the US. So if we can tackle food waste, we get so much of the way along the line, right? We don't have to give up other stuff if we can solve this problem. And there's actually some quite interesting tools for doing this. So there's a company, there is some AI here actually, right? There's a company called Winnow, and basically it fits these kind of bins with scales and a computer vision camera, and it basically assesses what's going in the bin, when's it going in the bin. In big commercial kitchens, it's used in places like IKEA, it's used on cruise ships, it's used in big hotels, and it says, look, after 10 o'clock, no one's eating your eggs. Those eggs are there all day, no one wants them. The tray after tray is going in the bin. And actually, if you can stop buying that food and stop wasting that food, you end up cutting out a huge amount of the problem. So what you end up with is like a kind of high-tech solution to what is in reality a really low-tech problem that has a big carbon footprint.
And what about the food innovations? I mean, is there something specific that you think we may be eating in years to come because of the climate crisis that we perhaps aren't eating now?
Yeah, I think the changes might be less in what we're eating, but more in how that food is produced. So a lot of the food might look similar or look the same, but it might be produced in a slightly different way. So, I spoke about flooding, destroying rice fields in Bangladesh. Well, a couple of decades ago, some researchers found this gene in this older variety of rice that basically meant this rice could spend up to 2 weeks underwater. It basically could hang out underwater, and when the floods receded, the rice kind of come back to life. They've incorporated that into modern rice varieties, and it's being grown by millions of farmers in Asia. So it's a good example of this kind of arms race between food scientists and climate change, and you can kind of use reasonably old technologies to kind of solve some of these problems. But one of the big problems, really, if we're talking about emissions, is basically this protein problem, right? As Modi said, livestock is one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture. So we need to figure out a better way to make meat, basically. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing plant-based meats fit in loads of these spaces where we've got unstructured meat, so burgers and chicken nuggets. I think it's pretty likely we're just going to see a bunch more of that. When it comes to structured meats like steak or fish, a cut of fish, something like that, I think we might see lab-grown meat or cultured meat end up being able to kind of fill in that gap, because it's going to be quite expensive, but it should be almost identical to real meat and actually be able to fulfill that demand without needing to grow an entire cow just to make a fillet steak. And then the other bit of the protein problem is fish production. So fish from a carbon point of view and a health point of view is much better on both of those fronts. So really, we want to be eating much more fish and swapping some of our red meat for fish. But since the majority of our fish are farmed now, they're not factory caught, we need to make sure we're not recreating some of these problems that we saw with factory farming as that kind of evolved over the last century. So I think we might see how our fish are produced as well. So it might be stuff like making fish feed out of insects, lots of interesting people doing work in that, or farming fish alongside seaweed or mussels and oysters and bivalves, so they kind of clean the water in a holistic way, or maybe even growing fish in tanks on land. So that's something that's seeing quite popular in salmon at the minute. So I really think food is going to be recognizable. It just might be produced in a slightly different way that hopefully take some of those emissions out of the food chain.
That's brilliant, Matt. Thank you so much for giving us a really good overview of the technology and food issue there. So we're now going to open it up to the whole panel. We've got some great questions sent in already by the audience, which I'll put to panelists. And I'm going to direct some questions to specific speakers, but please, speakers, if you want to jump in, just raise your hand and I'll come to you. I'll get to you and we'll try and get everybody heard. So I want to start with a slightly provocative question, and one that lots of people have sent in, including Sue Lister and Eleanor. Thank you for your question and thank you for listening. Some people argue that we need to stop eating meat and fish, and that we should all become vegan. So, and that's going to be the way to tackle the impact of the food systems on climate change. So can I first go to Modi on that one? Should we be vegan? Are you a vegan?
Thank you for the question. No, I'm not a vegan. I would describe myself as a flexitarian. But yeah, certainly being a veganism is pretty good for the planet, because on average, plant-based foods have 10 to 100 times fewer emissions than livestock and meat, as you know, we alluded to, all of us have alluded to. And so vegan diets are actually the least harmful on the environment in terms of climate emissions. But I did mention the planetary health diet at the beginning of this event, which we funded, which looked at what are the science-based targets for eating a healthy diet that is also good for the planet across a variety of different dimensions. And within that diet, there was basically space for things like meat, fish, and other animal source foods, but in small quantities. So you can eat meat if you want. The ideal amounts for the climate are eating meat once or twice a week, which means really halving consumption in rich countries like the UK and the developed world. But whilst veganism is the best, there is a role for other foods if people would like to.
Excellent. And Heston, would you ever consider becoming vegan?
I think if you ask a question to somebody, you're a vegan, why are you a vegan? For example, when they say, because I love it, boom. If everything on this planet is vibrational energy transformed between carbon molecules through water. So if you like something, this is what I'm trying to say that we have left out of this. I'm trying to speak slower so I don't shock people, but my belief is that we need to add our relationship with what we eat. If you drink water and you appreciate it, you give it love, you give it gratitude. We don't need to climb a mountain anymore to get water, or kill an animal to feed our kids, which is an amazing thing. Fantastic. We've made food too easy, which is also fantastic. We press a button and we get food. So if we could mouthfuls, think about what's our feeling in our gut, in our nostrils, in our lips, in our saliva, we would eat less food. I don't know how to tell people. It's a really simple thing, yet so complex. We throw too much food away. There's 72% of water on this planet and 72% of water in our body, apparently, according to science. And we started from our microbiome and our emotional connection, resonance and frequency. When we have a connection with the planet, did we cultivate wheat, or did wheat cultivate us to cultivate wheat? Does the bee go to the flower, or the flower go to the bee? So
that's pretty philosophical, Heston.
No, it's not philosophical, because, well, it might be. It might be. Our microbiome, if our there's a lot of research being done that if we eat probiotics, and we've already spoken about agriculture and rice, and resistant starches, which make the microbiome in the lower part of our stomach work harder. Cellulose, plant-based foods. Yes, that's great. That is great. However, we never eat for the same reason. Sometimes it's guilt, sometimes it's hunger, sometimes it's social, sometimes. So this is it's so complex, yet we have not yet found a way to measure it. So my laboratory in France, please, my laboratory in France is looking at frequency vibrations through water to change the structure of water. And I did two dark jars of rice. I've done a lot of this. One I played Hitler to every morning in a cupboard, and the other one Martin Luther King. Same rice, same water. I have played different frequencies. I've used singing bowls and all sorts of things to change a vibrational element of water. Emotion is vibrational energy. It is string theory. It is all of theoretical physics. Everything vibrates. So therefore, coming back to veganism, then I'll shut up, I promise.
Yeah. I need to hurry on so I can get some other questions in.
Well, I can finish quicker if you interrupt. If we give gratitude to what we eat, one grain of rice, and then tell a story around that, there's a family that's made that grain of rice. Why should we pay more money for our houses than we pay for our food, and we expect our food to be cheaper? Why, in this world, 72% of water, why is it not possible for every human being on this planet to have water? It doesn't matter if it's got chemicals in or not, just get water and eat something. Why? The distribution is because we invented money and time.
Okay, thanks, Heston. All right, thanks, Heston. That's given us something to think about again. So our next question, what about the impact of transportation on the food systems? Do we actually all need to start buying local? Does there need to be a fundamental rethink of our food systems to move away from that kind of globalized model of food production? So let's ask Modi to begin with.
Sure, thanks. I think that's a great question. And the short answer is yes, there's certainly a place for buying local. It's great for supporting local food producers and farmers. It's also really great for the environment if the produce is in season. However, there's often a role for imported and traded food. For instance, seasonal produce such as tomatoes, it's actually better for the environment if you import tomatoes that are in season in the winter in the UK, if you import them from Spain where they're actually in season, then trying to grow them in the UK under glass houses, greenhouses, which then use a lot of electricity to be able to grow them. So it really depends. The key is to eat local. There's a role for imports as well. Import food is also good for adding variety. In the UK, bananas, for instance, are one of the top fruits and vegetables that people like. And that variety is important both for diet and also making food more enjoyable. So there's a role for getting food from other parts of the world, supporting producers in other parts of the world as well. But wherever we can, certainly let's buy late season and let's buy local as a starting point.
Petronella, what about you? Should we all be buying local?
Yeah. We should be buying local where possible, but I believe there will always be a case for transporting food from a place of excess production to a place of scarcity. We've seen in Africa where we have areas where we grow too much food that it can get to waste if it is not transported to places where there's barely any food. And so there will always be a case for moving food from places to places of scarcity. We also need to know that meeting the needs and tastes of people across the world necessitates the transportation of food. What I believe we need to do within the food space is to ensure that the supply chains are streamlined to create more efficient transport systems, particularly in rural areas. By improving road networks and processing infrastructure, we would ease transportation from farm produce to the end market. This would both reduce carbon emissions from trucks, stuck in traffic, on congestion roads, and from food waste due to food rotting and going to waste before it is actually sold. So yes, we should promote local, but the globalized model will always, in my view, may remain relevant for a very long time.
Matt, I saw that you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, so maybe I made myself unpopular, but this is a bit of a kind of like a favourite bugbear of mine. I do think that perhaps people overstate the impact of transport on food because they see trucks and they see, shipping is dirty and all that stuff. There's an interesting study that looked at kind of the average EU diet, and it found that only about 6% of the emissions from that diet came from transport, which obviously if you can cut that down by eating local, that is definitely a good thing. I just think we need to look at locally produced food in context of, well, what are we eating and how was it produced? Because if you're eating a locally produced beef burger, well, that's going to be worse than a locally produced portion of chickpeas. So I think that we should be realistic about the size of the reduction and the impact you're making. There's lots of great reasons to eat local, but I don't think that it's enough to say, well, I source my beef and my lamb from my local butcher, and so I've done my bit, because it isn't on the same scale. I just think we need to be honest with ourselves about the differences in emissions. But yeah, eating local is still good.
Yeah, excellent, Matt. So what you're saying is it's a very nuanced kind of debate there about local versus global. So Kristin, I want to come to you about food waste. So food goes into landfill and produces emissions. It's not composted. What can be done about that, do you think?
Well, I think other people have already addressed the issue of transportation and overproduction in some areas. And I think some of that does come back to government subsidies, because here in the United States, farmers are really farmers of the who are doing the commodities are really encouraged to overproduce. But then there's also the part of food waste that winds up at restaurants and in private homes. And there are so many really great efforts to address that. I mean, here in Portland, Oregon, where I live, every single bit of food waste from the home goes into composting, whether it's chicken bones or artichoke stems. Everything goes into composting, and it's turned into a product that then nourishes gardens and landscapes. And there are also a lot of, I think it gets back to the human imagination part of it. There are a lot of people coming up with wonderful ideas of taking food, excess food that's produced at restaurants and even in homes, and distributing it to people who don't have enough food. There's a wonderful program here in Portland called Free Fridge. And there are on street corners, there are refrigerators and pantry shelves that anybody can put food in there. Like if I make too much soup, I can put it into containers and put it into that refrigerator. And then the people who are out there who don't have enough food can take it. And I think, there's a lot of ingenuity going into dealing with food waste at that end of things.
That's interesting, because we have on the road that I live on, we swap food between neighbours. If we can't eat it, we'll try and pass it around and just to reduce the food waste. So let's take another question from the audience. Mohammed asks, why is agricultural methane abatement not as prominent as carbon abatement measures in the UK? So why don't we treat methane emissions as seriously as we do carbon emissions? Are we too focused on carbon when there are other greenhouse gases to worry about? And Matt, perhaps you could help us out here.
Well, I think the reason why, obviously carbon is kind of the universal measurement for emissions, which I guess is why everything gets talked about in terms of carbon. I guess if you're talking about methane abatement, my understanding is that's mostly coming from livestock, from ruminants, or from rice production when it comes to agriculture. It's quite difficult to get rid of either of those things unless you get rid of don't grow rice in paddy fields, or you don't have cows, you don't have ruminants producing them, because cows basically burp up methane when they eat food. So I think that part of the reason why we concentrate slightly more on carbon and removing kind of carbon from the process is because there are already clearer routes towards decarbonising different areas of the industry, right? So we know we could use cleaner fuels, or we know we could switch to cleaner energy if we're running greenhouses and things like that. There are clearer routes. Whereas something like the methane problem when it comes to livestock, honestly, that's a really difficult thing. If you've still got the cow, it's really difficult to solve that problem. And I think that's why solutions like plant-based meat or lab-grown meat start to look much more attractive for that problem, because I do think certain aspects of agriculture and reducing emissions are going to be much more intractable where we don't exactly have technologies that we can kind of slot in. So yeah, certain parts of this are definitely going to be trickier.
Excellent. So this is really good, because we're getting into the nitty-gritty of how to solve some of these problems. And another one of those problems is affordability. How do we make sustainable food affordable food? So I would like to go to Modi first on that one, just very briefly, and then I'll come to Heston.
Sure. Well, very briefly, part of the reason why sustainable food currently isn't affordable is because of the agriculture subsidy system. So the unhelpful dietary trends that I described earlier around people eating too much animal-sourced foods, for instance, in the global north, and not enough fruit and vegetables pretty much everywhere in the world, is because currently we don't have enough subsidies for agriculture going to support those more sustainable foods. And one example is in the UK, just 1% of our agriculture subsidies currently go to supporting fruit and vegetable productions. The bulk go to supporting animal foods and feeds and that sector. And that is kind of replicated in the world. The poor diets kind of follow on from where the subsidies go for producing food. So one of the key things you need to do is start changing the subsidy systems to be better aligned with the planetary health diet, which is both healthy and sustainable.
Heston, do you worry about the affordability of food? I mean, how do we make sustainable food affordable food?
Yeah, I do, but not in the way that people think. We should be paying more money for our food and less money for our properties. Why do we have more square footage on our houses, but we want to pay less money for food? When families work their guts off to work for food, why should we want to pay less money? If you eat to feel fulfilled as opposing to eating to feel full, value more mouthfuls, you will eat less. If you love eating, it's fine. Love being a vegan. When you want to eat meat, all these figures are just data. It's so simple. When you value, the more you can value a mouthful of food or the imagination of the before you're going to eat a grain of rice. We talked about rice. And then turn your attention to your gut. How does that feel? Your relationship with yourself. You will eat less food. It's so simple yet so complex at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's great, because that's something that people really worry about, that we just don't pay enough for our food and we just undervalue it in our culture and the way we live. And I want to, because that, again, the question of affordability brings us on to the food production giants. If you talk about Nestle, PepsiCo, and we're not pointing fingers here, but do corporations like that have too much power? So that's something that will come up at the UN Food Summit. It's certainly an accusation that's been levelled at the big corporations. Do we need more independent regulation to ensure that they bring down their emissions and they invest in more sustainable practices, and to give small scale producers a bigger voice? So I want to go to Petronella here, please.
Thank you, Angie. Of course, I'm always going to say we need to give smallholder farmers a bigger voice. They are by far in Africa the largest producers of the food that goes on the tables and is exported worldwide. And so smallholder farmers need to have a say, one, in the price that they take for their produce, but also they need to have a voice in how they are going to grow their food. And they have not been given that platform for a long time. The big guys have been dominating the market and dictating prices across the board. And smallholder farmers have always been at the brunt of the food chain, trying to be able to even survive from the meager resources they get through systems. The shift needs to happen. And Farm Africa has been promoting interventions that really increase the productivity of small farms so that at the end of the day, even the profit margins that they get from their farms is increased because of the increased productivity. And so we feel also that big guys need to invest more in the smallholder farm commodity systems from which they get their commodities. So if somebody is going to need to buy cocoa, they need to be able to invest in creating sustainable production systems for the smallholder farmers from which they are sourcing their produce. Otherwise, they should be willing to provide a premium to enable these smallholder farmers to adopt sustainable farming practices. That's my take.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So thank you, Petronella. So look at something that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has founded. The Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation has founded the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. That was founded in 2006, and that was meant to transform African agriculture from a subsistence model to one that can increase output and, economically prosper. But it's had criticism for being too reliant on things like genetically modified organisms, on herbicides, and being too reliant on fossil fuels. So does something like AGRA have a role to play in making that transition to a more sustainable agriculture in Africa? Or do you think there is some justification for the criticisms of its modus operandi? Let me go to Kristin on that, please.
I don't doubt that many of the people who are involved in AGRA have their heart in the right place, but I don't think that their work is going to drive us towards a more sustainable agriculture. Most of the, I think 70% of, by some estimates, 70% of the world's food comes from smaller farmers. We should be supporting those farmers instead of pushing a mega farm model, which has been, I think, a failure. I mean, it produces an awful lot of commodities that then go through the food processing system and wind up as food products that don't make us very healthy. And I don't think that the mega farms would be able to survive if it weren't for vast government subsidies. So no, I think that we need to be pushing in a very different direction towards ecologically sound, regenerative agriculture that can, make people healthier, make the environment healthier, and not make these huge corporations healthier.
Excellent. Thank you, Kristin. So I want to take one more audience question. Sorry, you wanted to come in there, Petronella, very briefly.
Yes, just a quick one. Farm Africa is in partnership with AGRA. We are implementing the boosting the resilience of smallholder farmers through regenerative agriculture. And so there's room for big players like AGRA to promote regenerative agriculture. We are targeting over 10,000 farmers in Embu County in Kenya. And we're promoting all the beautiful practices that come with intercropping, crop rotation, use of organic manure, all of that at scale. Now, I believe that with big players like AGRA and other organizations pushing for smallholder farmers to adopt more sustainable agricultural practices, we would be able to reduce the carbon footprint of smallholder farmers in Africa.
Okay, thank you, Petronella. So I want to go to the audience again for another question, this time from Claire. Is organic the solution, or do we need a new food standard in the UK? And are products like in-farm for vertical growing a potential solution for domestic land use? Heston, what do you think? Very briefly. Do we need is organic standard? Do we need a new food standard?
Organic is a lie. what is chemical, what is not chemical. We talked about soil earlier. Water, bacteria is what made us human. So what's happened now is food companies have managed to use more subtle ways of lying. Distribution, blah, 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 blah. They just use more subtle ways of lying. And what is organic? Anyone knows what organic is? You can put, so the biggest wheat grower in the world was the same company that did napalm gas and did suicidal crops in Mexico. Briefly, I have a lot to say, and I have a lot to care about.
Heston.
So
but what you're saying is we should rightly be sceptical.
Why does not every human being have access to water and food? Why? When we've got the same water on this planet, why? It's money.
Yep,
briefly.
Very much so. And thank you, Heston. And this is going to be our last question. Let's get real, shall we? Because we are going to have a rising population. We're looking at nearly 10 billion people by 2040, 2050. Modi, this one's for you. Do you think we can feed that many people sustainably? Is it possible?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think absolutely we can. Pretty much everyone on this panel has already touched on the massive issue of food loss and waste. A third of food is wasted in places like the UK. Globally, up to 60% of food is wasted and lost when you take into consideration things like the food losses that Petronella was talking about earlier. So that's one way in which we could save and feed the planet. Another way that food is lost and wasted is through people eating too much. We've got very high levels of obesity and overweight. Around in places like the UK, 60 to 70% of the adult population is overweight or obese. That's basically a waste of food in a different form. Again, if we were to redistribute it in the ways that, again, Petronella was alluding to, that could be a way of ensuring that everyone is fed. And then another example is the food that's grown for animal feed. So, for instance, 77% of soy that's grown globally is used to feed animals. That there's a very poor conversion of calories from feeding animals to food. So for every 100 calories that is fed to an animal, that only translates into to around 20 to 30 calories that's available for human consumption in the form of animal source food. So again, if there is the food and the calories available to feed people, we just need to rethink and really prioritize that if that's what we really want to do.
Matt, can we feed the world without destroying it?
I think we totally can, and we've actually been in a really somewhat similar position before. So in the 1960s, there was this guy called Paul Ehrlich, and he was an entomologist, but then he wrote this book called The Population Bomb, and he said there's 3 billion people on the planet right now. There's no way we're going to be able to feed more than that. There's going to be famines, and this is all just around the corner. It was a huge bestseller. He was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He went for about 20 editions. Everyone had it on their bookshelves. But Ehrlich was totally wrong, right? The population more than doubled, and actually food production tripled, right? In lots of countries, crop yields tripled. Food production outstripped human population growth. And that came with lots of problems because we intensified the carbon intensity of lots of our food production, but it also meant that we've saved a lot of land use. This intensification means that an area the size of, I think, Europe and Mexico combined now hasn't been given over to agriculture. So we've really shown that we can meet the problem of feeding enough people. And now we just need to say, well, how do we strip some of those emissions out of there? And we have the technologies. Like what he said, it's eating less, it's changing behavior slightly, it's doing things a bit differently. We just need to be willing and apply all these things in a slightly piecemeal fashion.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. So there is a note of optimism to end on. Thank you to the speakers for their final thoughts on that and for sharing their thoughts on where we are now and where we're going. Putting food on our plates has a huge cost to the environment, and it doesn't have to be that way. And some of the innovations that we've heard of tonight are going to be on our plates, I'm sure, in the years to come. And we must get there in this next decade, during which we must reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But that is all we have time for tonight. Further events in the Climate Talk series will be announced later this month, and you'll be able to book a free ticket and find out more about them when they are announced via the link below. And if you'd like to support the Science Museum Group, there are 5 science museums in the UK which are free to visit and have a mission to inspire the next generation of scientists, engineers, medics, technicians and mathematicians. You can also find a link to make a donation in the description below. So it just leaves me to thank our speakers, Heston Blumenthal, Kristin Ohlson, Modi Mwatsama, Matt Reynolds and Petronella Halwiindi. And from me, that's a final thanks for you all to watching, and have a very good evening.